Morning, guys. So today we're going to talk about Maurya and Gupta India, a little bit different than everything else we've kind of been talking about. So we're going to roll with it. There's an assignment to do after this. I'll explain that at the very end of the lecture. So without further ado, let's get started. All right. So normally I would go ahead and have you do our bell ringer where you would draw the caste system. Don't worry about it. We're going to go over it again one more time just to get your minds flowing. So, in Hinduism, above the Brahmins at the top, we have the gods. Then we've got the priestlies and the priests and the academic class, the kings and the warriors, the artisans and the merchants, and some of the peasants, more of the peasants and the slaves, and then the untouchables, those that are outcasts, out of the caste system. If you need to go back and look at your notes on Hinduism, you probably should, because you definitely need to know this. All right, let's move on. So, India. India really came under the control of Alexander the Great. We're going to talk about him tomorrow. He left. He was like, bye, I'm in India, goodbye, I don't need this. And so new dynasties had to form in India because Alexander the Great just said, I'm out, India can do its own thing, it's not worth keeping control of this large of a territory, right? So, the first empire that we get in India is called the Mauryan Empire. I'm going to write it over here on the whiteboard so you can hopefully see it. But the person in charge of the Mauryan Empire is Chandragupta Maurya, M-A-U-R-Y-A. So he forms the Mauryan Empire in about 250 BC, so right around the same time as Han China. The Mauryan Empire extended pretty much all of the subcontinent into parts of what would be modern-day Pakistan, had parts of inner India, but really stayed out of the southern tips. So all of this, where those purple lines are, is the Mauryan Empire. So, Chandragupta unified the north, and then he marched south, started to take control of all of this. Didn't make it as far down here into the Tamil kingdoms, but still had a lot of control. He had very large armies, large enough that he had to tax his people. And by having high taxes, he was able to feed his armies, because farmers were required to pay half of their crop. So whatever you had, half of it was going to the government. And it was being used to really feed those huge armies to help keep India unified. Well, Chandragupta eventually dies, but not before creating a really, really, really rigid government. That government is really immortalized in a work called the Arthashastra. In it, it details what Chandragupta's government was like. It was highly bureaucratic, so think of it very much like China with the civil service exam. You had the bureaucracy, it's there. There were 4 provinces that were run by the princes. They were in command. Think of them like the governors. They were in charge and reported to Chandragupta. There were local districts. So local districts had control of people, were able to create laws and regulations for the government. But they also had spies, spying on the princes and on the local districts that were working for Chandragupta Maurya. They spied on people. They believed that the only way to maintain true bureaucratic control, as written in the Arthashastra, was to spy on people, report them, rat on them out, and if needed, kill them. They killed many a prince, many a local district leader, all to keep the empire unified and under control. Well, after Chandragupta dies, his son, Ashoka, takes control. And one of his first major military campaigns was at the Battle of Kalinga, where he slaughtered mass amounts of his own people. And he had a moment where he realized that that wasn't good. He showed a lot of remorse. He was very sad. He didn't understand, really, why they revolted and why he needed to kill them all off. So he studied Buddhism, and he brought Buddhism to the forefront of the Mauryan Empire. As a result of it, Buddhism kind of replaced Hinduism. But there was a lot of religious toleration under Ashoka. They respected Buddhists, they respected Hindus, they respected the Confucians, the legalists, and the Taoists that were immigrating from China or that were bringing that thought from China into India. And he built massive roadways. He is the reason that India became connected on the Silk Road, which is also how Buddhism was able to flourish in China. So Ashoka did a lot of great things for India and is probably the most important of the Mauryan rulers. Well, eventually he dies. Sad face. And we're left with the Gupta Empire taking over. And the Gupta Empire really controlled this part of what was once the large Mauryan Empire. And then they had a little bit of influence here, but not as much. So, the Gupta Empire is founded by someone with a name that sounds very familiar, except it's not. So, Chandragupta Maurya is the Mauryan Empire. Chandragupta is just the Gupta Empire. Confusing names, I know, but Chandragupta Maurya and Chandragupta. So Chandragupta eventually forms the Gupta Empire, which succeeds the Mauryan Empire. And they really fill the void after Ashoka died, and it's really based in the northern part of India, as I said earlier. The Gupta Empire was interesting for a couple of different reasons. In the northern part, especially this region here, the governments and society were really patriarchal. They stayed within the male line of the family. But in the southern bits, like this area under, influence of the Guptas, and down here where the Tamil are in southern India, they were really matriarchal. The women had all the power. Mothers in the families had the power. Grandmothers, mothers-in-law. They were the ones who got stuff done. And so you had these competing values going on, right? How can the North, how can Chandragupta exert his influence on the South when he, a man, is not viewed to have a lot of power, right? Think about it. If it's a matriarchal society and it's run by women, do you, the man, have the power? No, the women do. So some interesting competing social values happening in southern India. All right. Now we have to ask ourselves two important questions to recap what's happening in India. What are the two types of Buddhism? And why is Buddhism an attractive religion? All right. The two types of Buddhism are Theravada and Mahayana. And Buddhism is an attractive religion because anyone can achieve enlightenment. Theravada, Mahayana, anyone can achieve enlightenment. So, we're seeing a golden age of Buddhism start to thrive within India. So, we had the Theravada, which was the more strict in the way of the elders, and the Mahayana, which was new ideas and much more personal. And what we're seeing is part of Ashoka's reign, and the end of Ashoka's reign, when Chandragupta takes over, is we're seeing these new stupas formed. A stupa is just an Indian temple where you can go and pray and meditate and try to achieve enlightenment. They're being built all throughout India and even into parts of China. But while Buddhism started to flourish, Hinduism also started to make a comeback because the Hindu priests realized that they have to change it up a little bit. So we're moving away from the hundreds of thousands of gods that Hinduism has, and we're really focusing on two, Vishnu and Shiva. We're really focusing on what they're doing for us, helping us try to achieve moksha, liberation, right? And it's becoming more personal. We're praying to Vishnu and to Shiva, really asking them to intercede for us to help us achieve liberation from reincarnation, but also trying to get us closer to understanding Brahman, that universal soul that exists. So Hinduism starts to revitalize, and it's becoming just as attractive as Buddhism, if not more so, with just the focus on Vishnu and Shiva. So, we enter the golden age of Indian culture. I mentioned the stupas. We have the creation of Kalidasa. We're getting astronomy on the rise. The number 0 and the decimal system are introduced, and they're having huge impacts to this day, right? Indian astronomy has impacted everything that we do. The number 0, most of you know the number 0, has a huge impact, and our decimal system has a huge impact on how we do things around the world. So this golden age of Indian culture continues to influence to this day. And if that weren't enough, we're seeing trade routes flourish even more, moving from Aksum in Egypt, which is modern-day Ethiopia, Kingdom of Aksum in Ethiopia, moving up to Egypt, into the Arabian Peninsula, into parts of what will be the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire under the control of Alexander the Great, the Guptas, China, Han China, trading all of these goods from cloth to grains to ivory to metal to silk to spices to timber to the tortoiseshell to slaves. This Silk Road, both on land and by sea, is the most revolutionary thing that happens to these classical empires. China is connected to India, connected to Persia, connected to the Arabian Peninsula, connected to Egypt and Aksum in Africa, connected to the Roman Empire. Everything is interconnected, just like it is today. This is the origins of our interconnected world. Without the Silk Road, we wouldn't have things that we have today. We probably wouldn't have had long-distance trade. We probably would have been ignorant of the other societies that are out there. And that's just fact. So, your assignment for today is on Canvas. You are to create your own caste system. Really start to get creative with it. I want you to create something brand new. I don't want you to copy something that already exists. It can happen or take place anywhere in the world, in a fictional world, whatever you want it to be. But you have to create at least 5 castes, working your way from the top to the bottom, just like you saw in that pyramid. And you have to explain why they are placed where they are placed. And explain how they get liberated. The directions are all on Google Classroom. Follow those directions, roll with it. And I'll see you tomorrow when we talk about Persia and a little bit about Greece too.